Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Tech Corner. I hope you're ready for an awesome episode. I've got Carolyn Crandall joining me. She's the Chief Security Advocate over at Attivo Networks, one of our largest supporters of the show and a company I absolutely admire. They have brilliant minds there, Carolyn being one of them. You guys have seen Tony Cole on some of the other shows that I've had. And so we're going to have some wisdom coming our way today as we talk about Active Directory and moving and securing Active Directory from threats. So you want to stay tuned for that here in just a moment. I'll have Carolyn join the show. But before we get started, if you haven't subscribed to our podcast, please make sure to do so right now. Go to the CyberHub podcast page on any of your favorite social media platforms. Give us a follow, a like, and a subscribe if you're listening on your favorite podcast listening platform. And this is the first episode you tune into. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to help you in your journey to understand cybersecurity a little bit better. And hopefully we'll be able to do that on today's episode. I know my guest is going to crush it. I'm so excited for this interview. I can't wait for you guys to get a little bit more of it. So again, make sure to subscribe, follow, and share our show. If you're watching us on YouTube, turn on the notification bell as you subscribe. And that way you'll be notified every time I post new content. And we post over 10 pieces of content a week. So this isn't just your cookie cutter once a week show. We do so many different things. Make sure to tune in and watch our variety of content around cybersecurity, technology, and so much more. Now, without further ado, let's stop listening to me and let's bring in Carolyn. Here we go, folks. Tech Corner.
From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub podcast, Tech Corner. And now, join me in welcoming your host and CISO, James Azar.
Carolyn, how's it going?
It's awesome. Hey, James, how are you today?
You know, I'm unbelievably well. How about yourself?
Living a dream, tough times, but you find the diamonds in the rough and you just make it a great day.
You absolutely do. You're right about one thing. It's been a difficult 14 months or so, right? I think you were one of the last people I saw at RSA, right? Like last year when things were still in person. It's amazing that a year later, instead of us, sitting together at Moscone again and maybe doing this in person, we're doing it virtually over computers and screens and cameras and mics.
So true, though. I can't wait for the days when we can get back in person again and be live. But in the interim, this is still a great way for us to connect and be able to communicate. So I'm having a blast being here, and thanks for having me on your show.
I'm so excited to have you on the show because you and I have been talking for about a year, off and on, here and there, and the stuff that Attivo does, I personally love, right? I think, and you and I talked about it at RSA last year. Deception to me is the ultimate mind trick and the ultimate threat intel for a CISO's arsenal of tools, within an environment. It's a great way to do it, but you guys do a lot more than deception. People kind of look at Attivo and go, Attivo deception, but you guys do a lot more. And today we want to talk a little bit about what I like to call our crown jewel that's kind of looked at as our managed Excel spreadsheet, Active Directory. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, it's crown jewel, treasure trove, GPS, lots of different names that people call it. But ultimately, because it's where an attacker can go to get credentials, privileges, access, alter security settings, it's where they want to go and what they want to get to. And amazingly, it's not as well protected as you would think for something that is so critical to securing an organization.
Yeah, so I kind of want to start off with that. And I'm doing today's episode for our listeners and viewers a little different. Typically, we get, talk about you for a minute, but we're going to talk about you towards the end of the show today. I want to talk Active Directory here early. We look at the last decade of cybersecurity incidents and and a lot of them have been marked with Active Directory attacks. The next decade now, 2020 to 2030, 2020 was the year where we all transitioned to the cloud, and a lot of people used Office 365. A lot of people transitioned from the traditional Microsoft solution to Office 365 Online, which meant that your Active Directory is no longer sitting on-prem. It's now in Azure cloud. How do you see that transition over the next decade to the cloud impact Active Directory?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're definitely seeing it today as organizations try to decide between running separate on-premise and cloud instances for their Active Directory environment. And so, you think about the complexity of these 280 environments, how they connect with single sign-on, and transition, whether it's having a hybrid environment or moving everything to the cloud. Things get a little different, right? How you protect Active Directory on-prem, how you use, the Azure environment, and also how you start to deal with things that are not just credentials, they're entitlements and other things. And so it is going to drive a shift in thinking about how people protect this level of architecture and the identities that they're protecting behind it.
So that's kind of a very, I see that kind of be a little bit different, because when you look at the hybrid model, it seems to me like the hybrid model of Active Directory is a greater risk than maybe a committed on-prem or a committed cloud. Do you see something similar to that?
Well, it can be. It just depends upon everybody's unique business models. I mean, some people are going to go to the cloud and going to move as much as they can. And the, IaaS platforms that are there today have given the organizations an easier way to do that than there's been in the past. But there still is some reluctance. And then there's international issues, especially related to things like GDPR, that may cause different challenges with a company's ability to migrate to the cloud and how they run their business there. So I suspect that Active Directory is not going away anytime soon on premise. And what most people will do is end up running in this hybrid environment for quite a long period of time. But with that said, I do think that they need to be planning in that they probably are going to have some aspect of this that they want to build into their architecture for the future, because I think most business models will have some aspect of cloud in their business.
Yeah, so cloud is viewed as almost infrastructure as a service, right? In for a lot of organizations, which in some ways is almost an oxymoron, right? Because you almost want you to own your infrastructure and have it be you, and now you're kind of riding off of, let's say a Microsoft Azure infrastructure. Do you see infrastructure as a service really giving organizations more or less options in terms of really securing those environments, and specifically Active Directory?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's more options that are there, but also I think it's almost one of those inevitable things, right? It's going to happen. There's going to be more SaaS applications. There's going to be more things that are delivered completely through the cloud, and I think trying to resist that model is not going to give organizations the business competitive advantage as if they did, right? And it's not all just the economics of, can I save money by going to the cloud? It's, can I deliver better services by going through the cloud? And I think that there's going to be more options provided by vendors that are going to be done through the cloud, and it's just going to be facilitated better to keep everything in that cloud environment versus trying to partially do things, on premise, partially do things in the cloud. And so I do think the model is going to change, but the rate of adoption is going to vary a lot between, what kind of data they're managing, what kind of information they have, how secure of an environment do they need it to be. So it's a different model. You get a lot of think about, shared security models and how that changes, and what you're comfortable with and what you're not. But ultimately, I think every organization needs to be looking at their business to understand the benefits of going to a cloud environment, the implications of it, how their security stack changes in going into that model, and then making the proper adjustments. And how they protect, how they run, and how they protect directory services is going to be a part of it. And so if they are running a directory assurance program, they're going to want to think about, well, how does that change? And how does even the way that they manage their credentials and permissions change as they go to more of an entitlement-based model?
So that brings up kind of the next aspect, which is defending Active Directory, right? Which creates a challenge, since I think for a lot of people, in traditional enterprise, I've always looked at Active Directory as more of an OT rather than an IT system. And so, it's the keys to the kingdom. And I've got two questions about AD as keys to the kingdom. And the first one is, how do we change the perception that it's not OT, but it's a significant part of the organization and can be a our Achilles heel in terms of security. And the second one is we know that our adversaries use Active Directory to move within the network, gain credentials. How do we start to defend it?
Yeah. Oh boy, that's such a loaded set of questions. So let me kind of jump in here. So I think that how answering your first question of how does change get applied and how people look at Active Directory, because I think everybody's kind of forgotten about this GUI center, right? Everybody's protected the crunchy outside and the perimeter, and now that perimeter has changed with remote working, and as a regular business practice, you've got to start looking at lateral movement and privilege escalation. And what we've seen a lot, like with the latest congressional hearings related to SolarWinds and Microsoft, is that the reason why these attackers were able to move around and go undetected for so long was that this is a blind spot, right? We don't have very efficient tools, even if we're trying to do, looking at logs and behavioral analysis and pattern matching and keeping up with signatures. It's too much, too hard, and too complicated to do in this remote world that we live in. And so I think that's going to shine. And we've seen a change in the conversations with a lot of the CISOs, that this has gone, as you said, from, this is operational technology, we're just going to think about it from uptime, right? Is it delivering the services accurately to the users? To now going, oh, wow, if that gets compromised and the attackers exploit it, this could be devastating to my company. And so the awareness is obviously one big part of it. And I think those congressional hearings help drive a lot of education about privilege escalation and lateral movement and the gaps that are there. The other side I'd see is you see potential legislation coming out of that. So new regulation mandates that may come out. A lot of talk with insurance companies. They're not enjoying very much paying all this money out of their pockets for ransomware attacks. And so I think they're going to get a lot stricter about looking at how an organization protects their entire network. And since Active Directory is a critical part of it, it's like, hey, if you're going to insure the car and they say, hey, I want to make sure the engine runs right, or the smog test that you may get, I want to make sure that it's running the right way. You've got to make sure that Active Directory is protected and can't be tampered with, because if it can, then obviously the ransomwares can exploit it to download their malware and change security settings and expand their attack. And Active Directory is a crucial part of any ransomware attack of any scale. And then I think there's just, education, right? So we, as some of the vendors that are out there, have some really innovative and different technology that we want people to be able to see and understand that a lot of the challenges, that they faced with in the past go away. And become much more continuous and automated. And I know I'm kind of talking along, and I've only answered the first part of your question, James. But if I can take a little bit longer on this, is if we look at Active Directory, and not only to change the perception, you have to address the problems. And the problems come in the form of continuous visibility, the institutional expertise that goes on. So things are constantly changing, and it's really hard to detect good from bad inside of Active Directory. And so if you look at that, you might have point in time audits. You may be looking at logs that are kind of post the effect of something happening, but it's really hard to get ahead of those vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities is not just patching, right? There's things that you're never going to get a patch for that are inherently insecure in Active Directory. So how do you get visibility to those risks? How do you make sure that as your company grows, or M&A happens, or contractors come and go, or you just have those nasty old policies that are sitting there and you're terrified to turn them off or change things because you don't quite understand all the interconnections? And so you end up with this giant hairball that becomes very difficult unless you have very skilled workers to get to it. And even if you have the skilled workers, they may not have enough time to go deep enough into all of these different things that need to be analyzed and assessed. And so therefore, things just fall through the cracks. And so you've got to have the people, the training, and the time to be able to address this, or look for some of the new innovation that is going to automate these things for you and allow you to go a lot deeper than where you've gone before. So I didn't answer part 2 of your question, but I feel like I should pause for a second, and James, let you say if you want to react. You probably remind me what that second question was now.
I know I asked a loaded question, but my second question was how do we start to really defend AD from our adversaries who just use it so I like to say eloquently and so beautifully to move and credential harvest and change permissions, reduce security settings, disable different things, and really go in almost undetected fashion. And we saw that with SolarWinds. We've seen that with plenty of other breaches. And this is not the show where we bash victims of crimes. So,
no.
But we will say that kind of what you just addressed, kind of changing that perception, is critical as to what would be the next step. Is once we've changed perception, how do we defend it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and by no means, I mean, the folks, SolarWinds, Microsoft are exceptional. It really speaks to the advanced and craftiness of today's adversary. I mean, and behind any supply chain attack, you could probably list off 10 other ones. So I also encourage, don't get fixated on the brand as we use it as a point of reference, but more on the situation of what's happening. Supply chain attacks are going to continue to be pervasive. We've seen vulnerability exploits rising to the top. Many people are saying they're even above phishing emails right now, just because there's so many different things that they can exploit. So again, think about it from the context of advanced attackers using advanced tools, the commonality of the things that they have to do for these advanced attacks, like steal credentials, elevate privileges, and they do that through compromising Active Directory. And then they have to move laterally. And so if you remove all the brand names behind it and just say, if you look at your security architecture, how well are you prepared to be able to pick up that credential theft, the privilege escalation, and the lateral movement activities? And so there are some basic things for hygiene around Active Directory that everybody should be thinking about, and it is it's definitely multifaceted. So it's not just one thing. So you're going to look at hygiene, you're going to look at hardening, you're going to look at vulnerability and risks. And so I'd say as a whole, let me kind of go through a little bit of yes, we should all be doing these things, and then there's some more that is new that could be done. So implementing least privileges, tiered admin accounts, limited extra privileges, table stakes. I mean, everybody knows they need to be doing these things. I know they're hard and they're sometimes complex, but there's a lot of things around zero trust, least privilege that are starting to pop up that can help. You're going to want to collect your audit logs, send them to your SIMs or UBA, and this will help with reactively finding threats. Though I'll also say that this is a little bit like waiting for the car to crash and then doing the forensics on the accident, right? By that point in time, after you've analyzed that information, it's already a situation. So again, going back to some of the visibility would help ahead of time to prevent that attacker from being able to exploit those things. And the downside of this is that, just looking at the logs is, many of these soccer sim instances don't ingest Active Directory information. So even if they are looking at other log analysis and information, sometimes they're just not able to incorporate their information in and even be able to get that level of visibility. And then of course the downside is even when they do, there's a lot of false positives that will pick up. So if I kind of change the conversation from, okay, these are the table stakes, basic things, course patching, that should be done. How do you get into some more interesting things like looking at those vulnerabilities that are out there? And it was interesting as we did some of the development on our new ADS assessor product, that there's over 200 checks, there's over 70 vulnerabilities that we check, and a bunch of different live attack detections. And you go, that's a lot of stuff, right? Especially if you're going to try to do this manually. But you want to be able to have the visibility, because if they're able to get into Active Directory and start to mess around with it, and you miss things like password spray attacks, DC sync, DC shadow, golden ticket attacks, things like that, these can cause you to lose control and domain control, and that can become a very difficult incident to clean up. And so if you can look at the tools that are available today to be able to do that for you automatically, it's going to give you a lot more visibility to find those weaknesses and misconfigurations against your 80 domains and forests. You'll be able to reduce the attack surface by limiting those exposed or unneeded privileges. As I mentioned before, sometimes it's hard to do manually. This can help pop out those things for you. Dangerous delegations, shadow admins, want to have visibility into whether those are potentially harmful or not. And automation, right? The more you can automate, the more you can use these tools to correlate and analyze information. It's going to help, again, streamline that process. And then instead of looking at this wide swath of things to look at, you can have your advanced security team just really focus on the most critical things. Or maybe it never needs to get to that point because you can shut everything down before it gets dangerous. Spent a lot of time there talking about just the visibility for the vulnerability side of this. As you go through and you think about your Active Directory environment and ask yourself some of the questions like, could you catch those domain replication backdoors? Could you see things like skeleton key vulnerabilities? Do you see shadow attacks or do you see sync attacks? Can you see those easily? How about a Kerberos vulnerability assessment, right? How comfortable do you feel that you can see those things, or misconfigured Kerberos delegations? We also found that in a lot of our early assessments too, that hidden security identifiers and the ability to change them was something that was also very commonly missed, as well as LDAP configuration. So I know I'm kind of rattling off a whole bunch of what might seem like technical jargon, but if you go through this in your mind and you start to think about how well am I protected, and how well can I see these risks, and how well can I see if an attacker is using them in an attack? And if you start to feel not good or very manually, or only if I threw a whole fleet of people at it, then now is the time to start to look at the automation tools that can help there.
So that's really interesting. And I like the fact that I don't mind you getting technical. I think that's why we call the show Tech Corner, is because we do enjoy getting a little bit more into the technology aspect of it. There's you brought up a bunch of really, really good points, and one of which I think is the rise of ransomware, right? So if we kind of shift to everything you just discussed, we know that the most successful ransomware attacks are the one where they can get access to the AD, spread laterally across the organization, get credentials, encrypt, and those are the ones that are really crippling. How do you kind of look at defending that now?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, they're going to look at Active Directory and see how do they acquire their targets, get their privileges, get access to critical servers, and of course to download their malware onto things. And so, I think the things that I kind of want to break it into a few things. So, and again, some people may go, yeah, all right, this is kind of known, but for some other people, it may be a little bit more new. But if you think about how an attacker is going to exploit Active Directory weaknesses, most of the methodologies that they're going to use are things like reconnaissance, domain enumeration, local privilege escalation, local account stealing, admin recon, lateral movement, remote admin, domain admin privileges, cross-trust attacks, and other things that they need for persistence and exfiltration. And so here's a laundry list. So the thing that you need to do around protecting Active Directory, again, is not just necessarily one thing, but it's very, very useful to think about how an attacker attacks and how do you disrupt that kill chain, right? So if you know they're going to do all of these things as they try to leverage Active Directory for ransomware or any other form of attack, you can look at how you disrupt that process and prevent them from being able to either steal, modify, change things, erase their tracks. You can start to see what they're going to do. And the cool thing about this is it's not reliant on any type of, signatures or pattern matching or anything. And you're not tampering or changing anything in Active Directory. You're looking at the techniques that the attacker is going to use. And you can look at what they would exploit and make sure that you're not vulnerable. So first, shut down those attack paths. You can make sure there's no attack paths from the endpoint to AD. You can make sure there's no vulnerabilities in AD. You can make sure there's no vulnerabilities, like as we saw in the SolarWinds attack, where they jumped from on-prem to the cloud. Make sure that there's not an ability to go do that. And then there's some cool things that you can do once you go outside of, the vulnerability or the tampering within AD itself. Is there's some really modern innovation, Attivo released about a year ago, that you can actually data cloak things. And this is kind of cool because if you go, well, I can't shut down that access, or maybe I'm afraid to because I don't really understand by turning it off what implication that may have. You can use cloaking technologies so you can actually seal those Active Directory or conceal those Active Directory objects from the attacker. So when they go to look for it, the real things are not there. And then to have some more fun with it, you actually provide them back disinformation. So with the machine learning that's out there today, it can learn Active Directory. It can go, well, instead of it going Carolyn.Crandall, I'm going to give them back C Crandall, and it's not something that the company may use, but to the attacker, it looks extremely authentic. And so if I'm using Bloodhound and I go to query AD and I get back the information and it looks real, I'm going to try to use it. And that's the third piece, which ties to some of the deception heritage that Attivo has, is threat intelligence or adversary intelligence is extremely valuable, especially when it's company centric. So if you can, at just the points of discovery of an attacker, figuring out the TTPs, the IOCs, other things that the attacker's about, and you can do that safely, you can feed the attacker disinformation, lead them into a decoy, be able to study them, and then fortify your defenses and shut down any attacks or threat hunt for more other incidents that may be in the network. And so it's kind of a powerful, kind of set of punches you can play to kind of, change the position of power from the adversary back to the defender, and that you don't give them the easy candy, right? You don't leave the vulnerabilities out there for them to exploit. You can detect their activities, which is posturing like they're going to attack. And then the third thing is, well, you can just hide the things they want and go after, because if they can't get the AD objects, they can't get the credentials and privileges they need. Same technology also plays out to basically cloaking your files, folders, drives, shares as well, right? So if an attacker can't see those things, how can they steal them, change them, encrypt them if they can't get access to them? So there's some really new and innovative stuff that's out there that hides the attacker needs in the AD environment, and also on the data side and credential side that really makes it incredibly difficult for an attacker to elevate privileges or move laterally.
So that kind of brings me to more of a comment, but one thing that I've noticed in your UI is that you guys have actually incorporated the MITRE ATT&CK framework to really give people a little bit more context in terms of what they're seeing. Has that really, that's one, well done on that. I think that's something that's definitely needed. I use MITRE significantly. I think they do some great work. So it's great to see more and more people leaning in on the MITRE ATT&CK framework.
Yeah, we love the MITRE guys too. I mean, they have such a neat framework for being able to explain things and to help companies map their tools and the gaps and the methods of attack. Just some really fantastic work coming out, both from the attack side as well as the MITRE Shield side, which is more of the active defense piece of it. But it's really interesting because, if you use MITRE to understand your tools and your gaps and map to understand your adversary, and maybe to categorize these attacks as well, anything that a vendor can do to help make that simple and automate, right? So we have that information too. So we thought, well, gosh, it's kind of the same thing as you look at anything for efficiency. If you have something that can be done centrally versus having a whole bunch of other people do it individually and potentially take up time or come up with different conclusions, you go, let me make sure that I simplify this. And so we do that by taking a look, mapping it against the MITRE attack techniques and tactics. And so an organization can very easily understand. We also will map things in our reporting into CVs and other things too, so that it just saves a lot of time, right? Why bother to have to look it up if somebody can do it for you? And if we know that these things are commonly looked up, let's make it simple. Let's preload everything in, make it easy. And then also, if they are using it for any kind of reporting or tracking, it makes it very simple to see, okay, well, we thought we had good coverage in all the steps of MITRE, but it turns out we still have weaknesses in these areas. And so by also mapping the different tactics and techniques out, you can start to understand how to improve your security posture as well. So yeah, so we love it. It's a standard feature inside of the UI across our product portfolio now, and we do find a lot of people really enjoy being able to see that mapped out that way.
Carolyn, so we're seeing CISO, CIOs, CSOs, they're all transitioning into more being of a business enabler rather than the traditional siloed IT role. I've been on the business side as a CISO now for about 4 years. So I think I'm one of the early adapters of a business CISO from that perspective. But what changes are you seeing within the industry that are really transforming the roles and security in general.
Yeah. So I think, again, some of the things that are happening with, Congress and, government legislation, other things that are starting to pop up has gotten people sitting up a little bit more in their chair. Because obviously, if you're driven by regulation or compliance, you need to know if it's coming. And so I think that has, in a good way, elevated security to be more of a board and executive level conversation. So obviously, that awareness helps. Ransomware incidents and the frequency and the aggressiveness, I think, is also driving a lot of change. It's kind of a mix of, okay, you have the stick sometimes that has to come in, even if you should do it. If you get whacked over the head with it, you're going to start to look at things being a little different. I think insurance is also going to change, right? So if they go deeper into not just saying, well, I have security, well, what kind of security, and are you protecting, your most critical, crown jewels or assets, whether it be data or access through Active Directory. I think they're going to get a lot more specific, and those that don't have the right measures in place are going to have a bit of a harder time. There's also some insurance companies that are demanding that the ransomware be paid if they have to pay out on the claim, and that can have a lot of consequences to an organization. And so I think insurance, in thinking that through, will also influence, again, at the executive level, so that the voice of the security practitioners going, this is very risky, we need to address this, will be heard a little bit louder. We started with the shift to cloud. That's obviously going to change some things, as did remote worker. One of the shifts on that is an identity first security posture. If you stop to think about it so much as an edge and more of, okay, let's look at identities and entitlements and how does that change my view of things. And I know a lot of the things around identity access management, PAM, privilege access management, other things have been really complicated for organizations and big complex projects, but and people will look at zero trust and go, same thing, big, love the concept, very complicated if unachievable to ever get there. So instead, what does our journey look like? Trying to get towards that as an end game. And obviously there's steps. And the first way to get to any place, right, is the first step. You got to start doing it to get there. So I think that there'll be additional focus around that. And then, again, just fundamentally, as the CISOs start to, or CIOs and others start to think about this, is, again, going back to shift from a LAN edge thinking to identity, center on identity protection, but in the concept of anyone, anywhere, anytime type of access. And then you got three things to think about now as I look at the critical path. It's your endpoints, which there's a lot of attention on, but how do you go from endpoints to AD to the cloud and make sure that that security stack gives you the coverage that you think that you're going to be achieving?
So I like that approach, by the way, and I completely agree with it. Also, when you think of identity, if you solve the identity challenge, you almost eliminate part of one of the biggest weaknesses within your entire security system. We're seeing more and more exploits, though, and the more we invest in defense, the more our adversaries get creative in how to overcome them. And so I find it to be very it's the cat and mouse game that we all play in security. But to me, what resonated is the idea of how do we simplify PAM and identity access management so that it becomes more of it becomes simpler to administer, and it becomes simpler on the end user. Because at the end of the day, if we're able to have security by design and get users to really trust their identity beyond passwords, beyond multi-factor authentication, we create a different, we change security slightly. It's not revolutionary, but we definitely make it a lot harder for our adversaries to take advantage of the things they've been doing thus far.
Yeah, and it's important to think about not just authorization and authentication, right? It's protecting those credentials and the privileges as well. And I think that's a new dimension. I think some of the whether you call it KIM, the CIEM, or the cloud permissions management, different analysts call it different things, but as you start to think about it, there's like 4 different aspects that are all starting to come together around identity management, and some new areas that are popping up that don't fit into your typical IAM PAM or IGA type of spaces. And so I think paying attention to this area and what's going to happen around that identity permissions management and protecting entitlements, least privileges is going to get a big boost with capabilities over this next year or so, and will help make this more realistic and practical to be able to manage without maybe as much complexity as has been had to be done in the past with some of the older approaches to doing this.
So how are you rethinking security as part of the broader business appeal now going forward?
Yeah, you can't ignore the widespread remote working, right? That has changed so many different things. And so I think people really need to go and it goes back to that identity first type of a security posture is if I'm going to stop thinking about this from the edge and I'm going to think about this as an identity, how does it make me look at my architecture differently? So I think that's going to drive a broader appeal because you have to change, right? It is different. There'll be some things for efficiency and operations. People are going to continue to look for ways to get rid of manual tasks, make people more efficient, use their skilled workers more efficiently. And so, getting that identity piece right will help, because again, if you can not give access to the things that an attacker wants, right, it kills the rest of the kill chain and the steps behind it. But if they are able to continue to masquerade as employees and get access and elevate their privileges and move very quietly through the network, there's a whole aftermath of things that have to be cleaned up. And so I think that should be a heavy motivation for organizations to go, okay, we need to change the way we look at this, and we need to prepare that this is going to be a way of the future. And it also ties to if everything just theoretically did all of a sudden move to the cloud. Not saying it will overnight for everybody, but if it did all of a sudden start to turn in that direction, are you prepared, right? And you don't want to miss out on being competitive because you can't provide the same level of services that were a little bit more ready to be able to take advantage of this shift. And able to offer those services, but also to do it in a very secure way, which I think is going to be more required than what we've seen in the past. We've always kind of compromised security for innovation, but with all the things that have happened, I think people are pushing that up, whether it's government or otherwise, to say, you got to put security on the table too. You can't just release things and have default passwords and set passwords and other kind of crazy things where people can't adequately secure information. So that's, I guess, some of the things I think are going to change and influence what's going on there.
Absolutely. And so we're almost to the end of today's show, but I really want to get from you some insight, because you have a very unique position where you're on the practitioner side, you're on the vendor side, you're able to really kind of, be that referee in the middle. How does our communication between me as a CISO and let's say you as a vendor need to evolve so that we use the word partnerships and partners more than we do vendors and security, whatever?
Yeah. And I think it goes back to some of the basics. And I spend a lot of time with the media as well. And one of the fundamental things that they'll say is don't pitch me what I don't care about, right? If I'm a nature journalist and you come to pitch me this greatest thing in cybersecurity, I don't care, right? So it's really in the same way, vendors need to understand that CISO's business and what their priorities are and do their research. There's nothing more aggravating, I think, for any CISO or person where you're getting pitched to have go, oh, tell me about your business. It's like, well, okay, you should know a little bit about my business, but intelligent questions, right? Learn the business, do your homework, understand their organization, understand what's happening in their marketplace, and then ask questions and listen. Like so many times vendors will just get in and just, start talking and never stop talking. And so ask the questions, listen, and you will find those nuggets because you'll find out what's important to that CISO, what's keeping them up at night, what are they prioritizing and working on? And if your product doesn't fit into that priority, don't put a square peg in a round hole, right? Maybe that's not the right target customer to focus on right now. Find out what might be a better time to come back to it or periodically check in, and then move on to somebody that may be better aligned. It'll make your sales team more efficient. And it'll also keep the CISO in good favor because you respect it, right? This is not a project I'm working on, but maybe it'll be one in the future or next year. And then if it is something that you can do to help them, then you obviously can lean in and show them how you create the most benefits and value. The flip side of that is that, CISOs need to give the new vendors a chance. I mean, I know that the bombardment is just ridiculous, right? The number of emails and calls and other things. But, if a vendor has something that potentially could solve a problem that you're trying to address, is give them a chance, right? Because a lot of the new innovation is not coming out of the biggest of companies. Maybe the big platforms are, but the new innovation that solves difficult problems comes from these new vendors. So give them a chance, right? Carve out, I always do that. About 10% of our budget is experiment, right? We're going to go try some new different things, and some work and some don't. But if you don't experiment and try new things, you will lose that competitive advantage. And then CISOs need to give candid feedback, right? If a vendor comes and pitches them on something, or they bring the product in and it's not working the way, don't just put it on the shelf. Give the vendor a chance to understand what the problems are, where the frustrations are. And I think that also helps seal the deal in partnership, right? If you can work together through problems, and a CISO can see how committed you are as a provider to them and making sure that they're happy and they're getting what they need, those are where the partnerships for lifetime come in. Because look, it's technology. Nothing is ever perfect. Things always change and create new things. Things that worked yesterday don't work today. So just work it through. And if the vendor is responsive and addresses the problem and acknowledges it and works with them to get it through, that is, again, where the partnerships stay, because they know even if something goes bad, you're going to be with them and you're going to help them and not just leave them stranded. So don't forget about that day two support as a vendor, because that's where you can lose the customer after fighting so hard to win them. Is just don't pay attention to making sure that they're still getting the value they need.
Yeah, I would say I've been able to. I'm the one of the people who does give young vendors a chance. I do, but a lot of times it ends up being a cat and mouse game of defining a POC and what we want to define as success on our end and what they want to define for their own little case study. And so things don't always align that way. I would add that to it, is when you're young, take whatever you're getting and then worry about your case study after the fact.
True.
Don't come with the case study in mind. But I think generally, to kind of wrap up today's episode, one thing we all need to work on better is our vocabulary. And security is about partnerships. It's not about a vendor's relationship. It's about a partnership. To me, when I talk to vendors, I'm always looking for them to use the word partners. And if they say, we're a reliable vendor, then I kind of realize that they probably don't have the same culture or mindset that we do when it comes to security. And some of our best vendors are the ones who, randomly send us emails and calls about stuff they're seeing, just so that it has nothing to do with what they do. But they're like, hey, we're seeing something like this. Maybe you guys should take a look at it. And we're like, oh, yeah, maybe we should. Are we seeing any of these false positives in our SIM? Are we seeing stuff like this in the SOC? Are we seeing these kinds of things? And then if so, great. That's to me is the idea of true partnership when it comes to not only winning and maintaining the business, but also cultivating the kind of relationship that allows you to, as you expand your services as a company, to go to people who are willing to give it a shot.
Yeah, no, it's really good points. And it is a partnership. And if you want to, have it to be long term, it's a journey you do together. And I think we've learned a lot from having just a whole group on customer success and advocacy. That is their job. They're not salespeople. They're success people, right? So how are you using the product? Is it working the way that it should be working? Have you tried these new things, right? Whether it's features to turn on, or we have other customers that have seen benefit from this. And so you're being helpful, right? And like you said, sometimes maybe they'll use it, maybe other times they don't. And sometimes they had no idea because there's a lot of feature richness. So, having something where they hear like, hey, on these assessments, 50% of the assessments that we've done have found this particular vulnerability. Do you want to go in and check that out? Right. Would you like to see if you have that too? Those kind of things. And you're being helpful versus selling. And if the product is worthwhile, they'll buy it, or they'll buy more of it.
Indeed. Folks, Carolyn, myself, and Joseph Salazar, who's one of the smart technical people over at Attivo will be doing a webinar here towards June. I believe June 17th is the date. So make sure you register. I'll have a pre-registration link available on the bottom of this podcast so you guys can check it out and be part of that event. Even if you can't attend, register. We'll send you the recording of the webinar after the fact so you don't miss it. Carolyn has a trove of more awesome information to share, and we'll have Joseph joining us as well. I think he's the kind of guy who digs really, really deep into stuff, right? Joseph?
He is, yeah. He's a 20-year cybersecurity practitioner, ex-military, cyber ops. He's a fun guy to listen to.
He has awesome energy. He's not one of those people that is very technical and doesn't have the personality. He has the personality to match the knowledge, which is a unicorn all of within itself. So
yeah, we do. We limit him to one monster drink a day.
Keep that heart pumping right. All right, Carolyn, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing so much with me and the awesome audience we have here at the CyberHub podcast. And I really do appreciate your support of our show as well, and really being part of our community is something I'm always eternally grateful to companies who take a chance and want to support my vision for this kind of form of communications. And so awesome. With that being said, folks, we're all wrapped up. I'll be back Monday with a practitioner brief at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So you want to make sure to tune into that. Enjoy your weekend. Spend time. Go outdoors. Get some fresh air. Turn off your computer screens for a day or two. Turn off your phones for a few hours. Just read a book. Enjoy nature. Carolyn, do you do something like that on the weekends?
I do.
I'm an outdoor person, right?
I am. Love to get outdoors. And hey, now in a lot of places you can even do it without a mask if you're out walking around by yourself. So enjoy life. Get outside. It's beautiful weather, lots of fun things to do. And turn the computer off for a few hours. We all need a little break. So yeah,
work isn't going to go anywhere and nothing's going anywhere. There's no FOMO there. Just really take it easy, folks. Have a great weekend. Carolyn, again, thank you so much, folks. See you Monday, 9 a.m., folks, with the practitioner brief. Until then, stay cyber safe.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.